Tensions in Minneapolis and the surrounding Twin Cities region show no signs of easing as clashes between federal immigration authorities and activists continue to escalate, now entering their second consecutive week. What began as localized demonstrations has evolved into a broader confrontation involving federal agencies, local law enforcement, political leadership, and the White House itself. At the center of the unrest is the fatal shooting of Renee Good during an agent-involved incident, an event that has ignited anger, grief, and sharply divided public opinion across Minnesota and beyond. Since the shooting, the federal government has significantly increased its presence in the city, deploying hundreds of additional agents in what officials describe as a necessary response to rising security threats and growing disorder around federal facilities. Over the past several days, federal agents have been visibly positioned throughout Minneapolis, particularly around buildings used by Immigration and Customs Enforcement as detention and processing centers. Demonstrations outside these facilities have intensified, frequently stretching late into the night. Agents have used crowd control measures, including flashbang devices, to disperse protesters and prevent what authorities say are attempts to breach secure areas. These tactics, while defended by federal officials as standard procedure, have drawn criticism from activists who argue that such methods only inflame tensions and contribute to a cycle of escalation rather than de-escalation. According to federal and local authorities, confrontations have repeatedly turned volatile. Officers report being surrounded, shouted down, and obstructed as they attempt to carry out enforcement actions. When these encounters cross into violence or physical interference, federal officers have responded with arrests and tactical maneuvers designed to regain control of the situation. Minneapolis police confirmed that since demonstrations began, at least 31 protesters have been arrested within city limits alone, with additional detentions likely occurring under federal jurisdiction. Law enforcement officials emphasized that these arrests are not aimed at suppressing peaceful protest but at addressing what they describe as unlawful behavior, including obstruction of justice and threats to public safety. A striking feature of the protests has been the use of high-pitched whistles by activists across multiple neighborhoods. These whistles, often described by residents as ear-piercing, serve as a warning system within anti-ICE networks. Whenever immigration agents are spotted, protesters sound the whistles to alert others, allowing crowds to quickly gather at enforcement sites. Border Patrol officials told reporters that this tactic complicates their operations and often draws large groups of demonstrators to scenes where agents are conducting targeted arrests. Federal officials argue that many protesters appear indifferent to the nature of the individuals being apprehended, stating that agents may be arresting individuals accused of serious crimes, including violent offenses, yet still face resistance simply because the operation involves immigration enforcement. Activists, however, reject that characterization, insisting that their protests are not about defending criminals but about opposing what they view as an unjust and aggressive immigration system. They argue that federal agents operate with insufficient transparency and accountability, particularly in communities with large immigrant populations. For many demonstrators, the killing of Renee Good has become a symbol of what they describe as excessive use of force and a broader pattern of federal overreach. Vigils, marches, and confrontations with authorities have all merged into a sustained movement demanding answers, accountability, and systemic change. The issue has now reached the highest levels of national politics. In a recent interview, President Donald Trump addressed the situation directly, offering remarks aimed at the father of Renee Good. The president expressed sympathy while also suggesting that circumstances surrounding the shooting were complex and multifaceted. Trump emphasized his belief that individuals involved in such incidents cannot always be judged by a single moment, arguing that people may act differently under extreme conditions. His comments, while intended to project empathy and balance, have drawn mixed reactions. Supporters say the president is acknowledging the tragedy while defending law enforcement, whereas critics accuse him of minimizing the loss of life and shifting focus away from accountability. The president's involvement has further polarized public discourse. Some view his statements as an attempt to calm tensions by humanizing all sides, while others see them as politically calculated remarks that fail to address the deeper concerns raised by protesters. The fact that Trump publicly noted that Renee Good's father appeared to support him politically only intensified debate, with critics arguing that personal political alignment should have no bearing on how justice is pursued or perceived in such cases. Meanwhile, turmoil has also emerged within the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minneapolis. A series of sudden resignations has raised questions about internal conflict and political pressure. Among those stepping down is Joe Thompson, the second highest-ranking official in the office. His departure has been widely noted, particularly after Minnesota Governor Tim Walz publicly praised Thompson's career, describing him as a principled public servant who dedicated more than a decade to pursuing justice for the people of Minnesota. Walz characterized the resignation as a major loss for the state and suggested it reflects a troubling trend within the Justice Department. The governor's remarks went further, accusing the Trump administration of forcing out nonpartisan professionals and replacing them with individuals loyal to the administration's political agenda. According to Walz and other critics, these changes risk undermining the independence of federal prosecutions and eroding public trust in the justice system. The administration, however, denies these claims, arguing that staffing changes are routine and necessary to ensure that federal priorities, particularly on immigration and public safety, are enforced consistently. Federal officials have confirmed that additional U.S. attorneys are being sent to Minneapolis to support ongoing prosecutions related to protest activity and immigration enforcement. These newer attorneys are expected to align closely with the administration's approach, particularly regarding immigration-related cases in the Twin Cities. Supporters of the move argue that a unified legal strategy is essential in a moment of heightened unrest, while opponents fear it signals a politicization of justice at a time when transparency and impartiality are most needed. As Minneapolis grapples with nightly protests, increased federal presence, and growing political fallout, residents find themselves caught between competing narratives. On one side are those who argue that strong enforcement and federal intervention are necessary to maintain order and uphold the law. On the other are voices demanding restraint, accountability, and a re-examination of immigration policies they believe disproportionately harm vulnerable communities. The death of Renee Good has become a focal point for these broader debates, transforming a single tragic incident into a national flashpoint. What remains clear is that the situation in the Twin Cities is far from resolved. With protests continuing, federal agents remaining on high alert, and political leaders trading sharp accusations, Minneapolis stands at the intersection of law enforcement, immigration policy, and civil unrest. Whether the coming weeks bring de-escalation or further confrontation will likely depend on decisions made not only on the streets but also in courtrooms, government offices, and the halls of Washington. For now, the city remains tense, divided, and under intense national scrutiny, symbolizing a deeper struggle over authority, accountability, and the future direction of immigration enforcement in the United States.